Chapter 1. The Occupied Seat. The grand hall of the Ashford estate glittered with candlelight and whispered promises, yet Isolde Ashford felt neither warmth nor welcome. She had been commanded rather, to attend the winter solstice gathering by her stepmother, Lady Vivienne, who desired her absence more than her company. The instruction had been clear: remain unseen, cause no embarrassment, and return to your chamber before midnight. Isolde had obeyed, as she always did. She wore a gown of dove-gray silk that rendered her nearly invisible among the jewel-toned ladies who laughed and conspired beneath the chandeliers. Her late father's estate now belonged to Vivienne, and Isolde existed within it as little more than a shadow, a forgotten daughter with no dowry, no prospects, and no voice. The musicians began a waltz. Couples swept onto the floor, and Isolde retreated toward the periphery, seeking refuge in the alcoves where servants moved like ghosts. She found a cushioned bench near a tall window overlooking the snow-covered gardens and sank onto it with quiet relief. The cold from the glass seeped through the velvet curtain at her back. She closed her eyes, permitting herself one stolen moment of peace. "You are in my seat." The voice was low, quiet, and immeasurably old. Isolde's eyes flew open. A man stood before her. No, not a man. Something ancient and impossible, draped in black velvet and silver embroidery that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. His face was pale as winter moonlight, his features carved with such precision they appeared inhuman. Dark hair fell to his shoulders, and his eyes, gray as storm clouds, fixed on her with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. She rose at once, stammering an apology. "Forgive me, my lord, I did not know." "Sit." The word was not harsh, but it carried a weight that pressed her back onto the bench. He moved with unnatural grace, lowering himself beside her. The space between them was narrow, and Isolde felt the chill radiating from him, a cold that had nothing to do with winter. "You are Ashford's daughter," he said. It was not a question. "I am." Her voice trembled despite her effort to steady it. "Isolde Ashford. I knew your father." His gaze drifted toward the dancers, though she sensed he saw something far beyond them. He was a man of honor, a rare quality. Isolde's throat tightened. Her father had died 2 years prior, leaving her at the mercy of a stepmother who resented her existence. She had learned not to speak of him, not to mourn aloud. "You honor his memory, my lord." The stranger turned his attention back to her, and for the first time, something flickered in those gray eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or recognition. "You do not know who I am." It was true. She had never seen him before, and yet every instinct screamed that she should have, that his presence here was significant, dangerous. "I do not," she admitted. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, though it held no warmth. "Good." Before she could respond, he lifted one gloved hand. For a heartbeat, Isolde thought he might dismiss her, send her away as everyone else did. Instead, he extended it toward her, palm upward. "Stay." The word was a murmur, barely audible above the music, yet it resonated through her like a bell tolling in an empty cathedral. She stared at his offered hand, her heart pounding against her ribs. Every lesson in propriety told her to refuse, to retreat, to obey Vivienne's orders and disappear. But something deeper, something she could not name, compelled her to accept. Her fingers trembled as she placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, cold, and impossibly gentle. The moment their skin touched, the world seemed to tilt. The sounds of the ballroom faded to a distant hum. The cold intensified, racing up her arm like frost spreading across glass. And in that instant, Isolde saw something impossible. A vast hall carved from black stone, torches burning with blue flame, a throne of bones and iron. And this man, this stranger seated upon it, crowned in silver, his eyes burning with ancient power. A king, she gasped, pulling her hand away, but the vision clung to her like cobwebs. Her breath came in shallow bursts. What are you?" He watched her with an expression she could not decipher. "You should not have been able to see that." "See what?" Her voice broke. "What did you show me?" "Nothing." He rose to his feet, and the distance he placed between them felt deliberate, protective. "You saw it yourself." Terror and fascination warred within her. She knew she should flee, should scream, should do anything but remain seated before this creature who was not human. Yet her body refused to obey. "Who are you?" she whispered. He regarded her in silence for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. "My name is Thaddeus Corvain, and you, Isolde Ashford, have just made a grave mistake." "What mistake?" His gaze held hers, and in its depths, she saw hunger and restraint locked in eternal battle. "You touched me willingly. You accepted my hand without compulsion or glamour." He paused, and something that might have been regret shadowed his features. "There are consequences to such things." "I do not understand." "You will." Across the ballroom, a woman's laugh rang out, Vivienne's, sharp and cruel. Thaddeus glanced toward the sound, and his expression hardened into something that made Isolde's blood run cold. "Your stepmother has made arrangements," he said quietly. "She has sold this estate's protection to another. A bargain sealed in blood and gold." "Protection from what?" His eyes returned to her, and for the first time she saw true emotion in them. Sorrow. "From me." Before Isolde could speak, before she could breathe, Thaddeus Corvain stepped back into shadow and vanished as though he had never existed at all. She sat alone on the bench, her hand still tingling from his touch, her mind reeling with impossible visions. Around her, the ball continued, oblivious. But Isolde knew, with certainty that settled in her bones like winter's chill, that nothing would ever be the same. The vampire king had touched her, and she had asked him to stay. Chapter 2. The Waking Dream. Isolde did not sleep that night. She returned to her chamber as instructed, dismissed her maid, and stood at the window overlooking the snow-laden gardens until dawn broke gray and cold across the horizon. Her hand, the one he had held, remained cold, as though his touch had left frost beneath her skin. Thaddeus Corvain. The name circled her thoughts like a bird of prey. She had searched her memory for any mention of it, any whisper in her father's journals or her stepmother's correspondence. Nothing. Yet the way he had spoken of protection, of bargains, suggested he was no stranger to the Ashford estate, or to its secrets. Morning brought no answers, only exhaustion and the dull ache of questions that had no place to land. Isolde dressed in a simple muslin gown and made her way to the breakfast room, where Vivienne held court over her stepdaughters, Isolde's younger half-sisters, who regarded her with the distant politeness reserved for unwanted guests. "You left early last night," Vivienne observed, her tone sharp as cut glass. She sat at the head of the table resplendent in emerald silk, her beauty as cold as it was undeniable. "I trust you did not embarrass yourself." "I did not, Lady Vivienne." "Good. You are dismissed from tonight's supper. Lord Grayson will be joining us, and your presence would be inconvenient." Isolde nodded, relief washing through her. Lord Grayson was a business associate of Vivienne's, a man whose eyes lingered too long and whose smile held promises Isolde had no wish to understand. She retreated to the library, the one sanctuary remaining from her father's time. Here, the books still smelled of leather and pipe smoke, and the silence was companionable rather than suffocating. She pulled down a volume on local history, searching for any reference to the Corvain name. Hours passed. The winter sun climbed weakly across the sky and began its descent. Isolde found nothing. No family crest, No estate, no mention of anyone named Thaddeus Corvain. It was as though he existed outside of record, outside of time. What are you? The question haunted her, as did the vision she had seen, the throne, the crown, the terrible power that had radiated from him like cold fire. As twilight deepened, Isolde became aware of a change in the air, a heaviness, as though the atmosphere itself had thickened. The candles guttered despite the absence of wind. Her breath misted before her face. She was no longer alone. You should not have come looking for me. Isolde spun toward the voice. Thaddeus stood in the shadows between the bookshelves, as still as carved marble. He wore the same black attire, and his eyes gleamed in the dim light like polished steel. I did not, she said, her voice steadier than her heartbeat. I sought answers. You will find none that bring you comfort? I am already without comfort, my lord. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze despite the fear that whispered through her veins. My father is dead. My home is no longer mine. I exist at the sufferance of a woman who wishes me gone. What answers could be worse than that? Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or admiration. He moved closer, and the cold intensified. You are braver than you appear. I am desperate, Isolde corrected. Desperation mimics courage. A silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. Finally, Thaddeus spoke. Your stepmother made a bargain 3 months past. She offered gold and other considerations to those who hunt my kind. In exchange, they would rid this estate of my protection. Your protection? Isolde struggled to comprehend. Why would we need protection from you? Why would we need protection at all? Because there are worse things than me in this world, Isolde Ashford. His voice dropped to a murmur. And your father knew it. He sought my covenant 20 years ago, when you were but a child. He pledged his family's safety to me in exchange for a single promise. What promise? Thaddeus did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat and withdrew a folded parchment, aged and sealed with black wax. He offered it to her. Isolde took it with trembling fingers. The seal bore a symbol she recognized instantly, her father's signet ring, the one buried with him. She broke the wax and unfolded the parchment. The handwriting was her father's. To Thaddeus Corvain, Lord of the North Country, I pledge the safety of my bloodline to your keeping. In exchange, I vow that no Ashford will raise arms against your kind, nor will we suffer those who hunt you to find shelter beneath our roof. This covenant is bound by blood and honor, and will endure beyond my mortal span. Let my daughter be spared the knowledge of darkness, until such time as she chooses to see. Edmund Ashford, Isolde's hands shook. He made a treaty with you. Yes. And my stepmother broke it. Yes. She looked up at him, understanding dawning like cold light. That is why you were at the ball. You came because the covenant was severed, because those she invited into this house hunt my kind with silver and holy flame, because your father's protection died with his oath. Thaddeus stepped closer, and Isolde saw the restraint in every line of his body. I came to retrieve what was promised. What was promised? Her voice was barely a whisper. His gaze held hers, and in it, she saw centuries of hunger, loneliness, and something that might have been regret. Your father swore his bloodline to my protection, his blood, his lineage. He paused. You. The room seemed to tilt. I do not understand. You bear your father's blood? His oath extends to you. And when you took my hand last night, when you accepted willingly without compulsion, you renewed the covenant he made. Horror and something darker. Something Isolde refused to name, coiled in her chest. I did not know. No. Thaddeus's expression softened just fractionally. You did not. But ignorance does not unmake binding. What does this mean? He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle, and somehow that gentleness was more terrible than any threat. It means you are mine to protect, Isolde Ashford. And I am yours to endure. I do not want. It does not matter what you want. His words were not cruel, merely factual. The covenant is sealed, and those who hunt me will soon learn that you are under my dominion. Isolde's breath came in shallow gasps. What will you do? Thaddeus turned toward the window, where night had fully claimed the sky. I will do what I have done for 5 centuries. I will protect what is mine. He looked back at her one final time, and his eyes held an emotion she could not decipher. Even if it destroys us both. Then he was gone, leaving only cold air and the echo of impossible promises. Chapter 3. The Hunter's Arrival. 3 days passed in suffocating silence. Isolde moved through the estate like a ghost, avoiding Vivian and her half-sisters, spending her hours in the library or the cold sanctuary of her chamber. She did not see Thaddeus again, though she felt his presence, a watchfulness that prickled at the edges of her awareness, particularly after dark. The covenant. Her father's oath. You are mine to protect. The words haunted her waking hours and twisted through her dreams. She had tried to convince herself it was madness, a delusion brought on by grief and isolation. But the parchment remained, locked in her writing desk, and the cold that lingered in her hand would not fade. On the 4th morning, horses arrived. Isolde heard them from her window, a company of riders, their mounts snorting clouds of steam into the winter air. They wore dark cloaks and carried weapons openly, silver-edged swords, crossbows, stakes of ashwood. At their head rode a man whose face was scarred and hard, his eyes the pale blue of frozen water. Vivian greeted them personally, her smile bright and false. Isolde's blood ran cold. She descended the stairs carefully, keeping to the shadows, and positioned herself where she could observe without being seen. The scarred man dismounted and bowed with military precision. Lady Ashford, we received your summons. Captain Aldrich. Vivian's voice dripped with satisfaction. I trust your journey was uneventful? As uneventful as travel through cursed lands can be, my lady. His gaze swept the hall with the practiced assessment of a predator. You claim the vampire lord has returned? He has been seen, multiple times. Vivian's expression hardened. My late husband's foolish covenant is void. I will not harbor a monster's protection. You were wise to contact the order. Aldrich gestured to his men, who began unloading equipment. Iron chains, blessed silver, vials of what Isolde suspected was holy water. We will cleanse your estate of his taint. Isolde's hands clenched against her skirts. She wanted to flee, to hide, but something rooted her in place. These men had come to kill Thaddeus, to destroy him for the crime of honoring her father's oath. Why do you care? A voice whispered in her mind. He is a monster, a creature of darkness. But she remembered the sorrow in his eyes, the gentleness in his voice when he had said, You are braver than you appear. My stepdaughter may have had contact with him, Vivian said, and Isolde's heart stopped. She disappeared from the ball for nearly an hour. When questioned, she refused to explain. Aldrich's attention sharpened. Bring her to me. That will not be necessary. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. The temperature plummeted, candles extinguished in a wave of darkness. Isolde heard gasps, the rasp of steel being drawn, Vivian's sharp intake of breath. And then Thaddeus was simply there, standing in the center of the hall as though he had materialized from shadow itself. He looked every inch the King Isolde had seen in her vision. Tall, commanding, utterly without fear. His gray eyes swept over the hunters with cold disdain. You trespass, he said quietly. Aldrich recovered quickly, raising his crossbow. By the authority of the Order of the Silver Dawn, I command you to. You command nothing. Thaddeus did not move, did not even raise his voice, yet the words carried such weight that Aldrich stumbled back a step. This estate is under covenant protection. You have no jurisdiction here. The covenant is broken, Vivian spat. I dissolved it. You cannot dissolve what was not yours to give. Thaddeus's gaze found Isolde in the shadows, and something passed between them, a recognition, an acknowledgement. The oath was sworn in Ashford blood. Only Ashford blood can break it. Then we'll take the girl, Aldrich said, his voice ugly. If she's bound to you, she's already corrupted. The Order has methods for— The temperature dropped so precipitously that frost formed on the windows. Thaddeus moved, a blur of shadow and lethal grace, and suddenly he stood between Aldrich and Isolde, one pale hand extended in a gesture that was both protection and warning. Touch her, he said softly, and I will show you why your order fears the dark. Silence crashed through the hall. Isolde could hear her own heartbeat, wild and frantic. She saw the calculation in Aldrich's eyes, the fear poorly masked by bravado. This is not over, vampire. No, Thaddeus agreed. It is not. The hunters retreated, gathering their equipment with forced dignity. Vivian's face had gone white with fury, but even she did not dare speak. Within minutes, the hall was empty save for Isolde and Thaddeus. He did not turn to face her. You should have stayed hidden. Isolde's voice failed. She tried again. They would have found me regardless. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Your stepmother has made you a target. Because of the covenant. Because of me. Now he did turn, and the weight of his gaze was almost physical. I have brought danger to your door, Isolde Ashford. The Order will not relent. They will return with greater numbers, blessed weapons, perhaps even a sanctified knight. Fear and something else, something warm and treacherous, coiled in her chest. What will you do? What I must. He moved toward her, and though every instinct screamed danger, Isolde did not retreat. I will take you from this place. Tonight, when darkness is full, you will come with me to the North Country, where the covenant was first forged. I cannot just— You have no choice. His voice gentled, but the words remained implacable. If you stay, the Order will use you to draw me out. They will torture you for information. They will make you watch as they destroy everything you have ever known. His hand lifted, hovering near her cheek but not quite touching. I will not permit that. Isolde's breath caught. You barely know me. I know enough. His eyes held hers, and in their depths, she saw centuries of loneliness. I know you are your father's daughter. I know you have honor in a world that has forgotten the meaning of the word. And I know that I will not allow the Order to break you. What if I refuse? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Then I will take you anyway, and spend eternity earning your forgiveness. Before she could respond, he stepped back into shadow. Be ready at midnight, Isolde. Bring nothing. Trust no one. Wait. But he was already gone, leaving her alone in the cold hall with impossible choices and a heart that beat far too fast. Chapter 4. The Flight into Darkness. Midnight found Isolde standing at her chamber window, a single cloak wrapped around her shoulders, and terror warring with anticipation in her chest. She had not packed, had not said goodbye, had not even left a note, though she knew Vivian would hardly mourn her disappearance. Her half-sisters would forget her within a fortnight, and the servants had always treated her as invisible. Only her father would have cared, and her father had bound her to this fate 20 years ago. Did you know? She wondered, staring at the star-scattered sky. Did you know what you were condemning me to? The clock tower told 12, each bell note shivering through the frozen air. On the final stroke, shadow coalesced beside her. Are you ready? Thaddeus stood in her chamber as though the locked door and stone walls meant nothing. He wore traveling clothes, black leather and wool, and his hair was tied back, revealing the sharp, elegant bones of his face. Isolde's mouth went dry. "How did you—" "Locks are for mortals." He extended his hand. "We must go. Now." "The hunters have surrounded the estate, which is why we are not leaving through conventional means." His expression was unreadable. "Trust me, Isolde." It was madness. She knew it with every rational part of her mind. And yet when his fingers closed around hers, cold, strong, impossibly gentle, she did not pull away. "Close your eyes." She obeyed. The world lurched. Wind howled in her ears, bitter and fierce, and she felt herself falling. No, flying, through Kong-Yan that bent and twisted in ways her mind could not comprehend. She would have screamed, but the air was torn from her lungs. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Isolde's knees buckled. Thaddeus caught her easily, steadying her against his chest. "Breathe," she gasped, her vision swimming. Slowly the world resolved into focus. They stood on a snow-covered ridge overlooking a vast dark forest. Behind them rose mountains whose peaks were lost in cloud. Before them, barely visible through the trees, stood the ruins of what must have once been a magnificent castle. Black stone towers reaching toward the sky like broken fingers. "Where are we?" Her voice was hoarse. "The North Country." Thaddeus released her carefully, as though she might shatter. "My domain, or what remains of it." Isolde stared at the ruins. "You lived there?" "Once." Something ancient and painful flickered across his face. "Before the purges. Before the Order burned half of Europe in their righteous fury." "They destroyed your home?" "They tried." His gaze remained fixed on the castle. "They succeeded in destroying everyone I loved. The castle, however, proved more resilient." The sorrow in his voice was so raw that Isolde ached with it. She wanted to ask more, to understand, but footsteps crunched in the snow behind them. Thaddeus moved instantly, placing himself between Isolde and the approaching figure. But then he relaxed fractionally. "Alaric." The man who emerged from the tree line was tall and pale, with silver-white hair and eyes like chips of ice. He moved with the same unnatural grace as Thaddeus, and when those eyes found Isolde, she knew immediately what he was. Another vampire. "So it is true." Alaric's voice was smooth, cultured, and faintly amused. "You have brought a mortal to the court, the first in 3 centuries. She is under covenant protection," Thaddeus said quietly. "Blood oath. Binding." Alaric's eyebrows rose. "Ashford's daughter?" "Yes." A long silence followed. Alaric studied Isolde with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Finally, he inclined his head. "The court will wish to see her." "The court can wait until dawn." "Thaddeus." "Dawn, Alaric." There was steel beneath the quiet words. "She is exhausted, frightened. I will not parade her before the others like some curiosity." Alaric's lips curved into something that might have been a smile. "You have grown soft, old friend." "I have grown careful." Thaddeus glanced at Isolde, and the concern in his expression was almost human. "Take us to the East Tower. The chambers there are still habitable." "As you wish, my lord." Alaric's tone held mockery and respect in equal measure. "But know that Lady Seraphine has already heard of your arrival. She will demand an audience." Something dark crossed Thaddeus's face. "Let her demand." They walked in silence through the snow, following a path that led down into the forest and eventually to the castle ruins. Up close, the structure was even more imposing. Vast halls opened to the sky, staircases leading to nowhere, walls blackened by ancient fire. Yet portions remained intact, and it was to one of these that Alaric led them. The east tower rose 4 stories, its windows dark, but its structure sound. Inside, the rooms were furnished in a style centuries out of date. Heavy tapestries, carved furniture, candelabras that sprang to life with cold blue flame as they entered. "You will be safe here," Thaddeus said, gesturing to a chamber dominated by a massive 4-poster bed. "No one will enter without my permission." Isolde turned to face him, suddenly aware that they were alone. Alaric had vanished as silently as he had appeared. "What is the court?" "The remnants of my kind, those who survived the purges and chose to remain in the old lands." His expression was carefully neutral. "We are few now, perhaps 24 in total. And they will want to see me because you are human, because you carry a covenant bond, and because—" He hesitated. "Because there are those among us who believe mortals should be cattle, not companions. Your presence will force a reckoning." Fear spiked through her. "You have brought me into danger." "Yes." He did not lie, did not soften it. "But you were already in danger. At least here, I can protect you." "Why?" The question burst from her before she could stop it. "Why do you care? I am nothing to you. A stranger, an obligation inherited from my father." Thaddeus was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was so soft she almost missed it. "You are not nothing." He turned toward the door, his movements stiff, controlled. "Sleep, Isolde. Tomorrow will bring answers. And trials." He was gone before she could respond, leaving her alone in a tower at the edge of the world, bound to a creature of darkness by an oath she had never sworn. Isolde sank onto the bed, trembling, and wondered if dawn would ever come. Chapter 5. The Court of Thorns. Isolde woke to pale winter sunlight streaming through the tower windows. For a confused moment she thought herself back in her chamber at the Ashford estate. Then memory crashed through her. The hunters, the flight through impossible space, Thaddeus's sorrow-weighted voice saying, "You are not nothing." She rose stiffly and found that someone had left a gown draped over the chair. Deep blue velvet with silver embroidery, far finer than anything she had owned in years. A basin of water sat on the table, along with bread, cheese, and fruit that looked almost too perfect to be real. Isolde dressed quickly, her fingers fumbling with the unfamiliar fastenings. The gown fit perfectly, which unsettled her. Had Thaddeus guessed her measurements? Or did something more unnatural explain it? A knock sounded at the door. "Enter," she called, her voice steadier than her heartbeat. The woman who stepped inside was breathtaking, tall and willowy, with raven-black hair that fell to her waist and skin like polished ivory. Her gown was crimson silk, and her eyes, golden feline, fixed on Isolde with predatory interest. "So you are the Ashford girl?" Her voice was honey over glass. "How quaint." Isolde lifted her chin, refusing to be cowed. "And you are?" "Lady Seraphine Volkov." The woman moved closer, circling Isolde like a wolf assessing prey. "I have known Thaddeus for 4 centuries. We have been intimately acquainted." Jealousy, sharp and unexpected, stabbed through Isolde's chest. She forced it down. "I am honored to meet you, Lady Seraphine." "Are you?" Seraphine's smile was cold. "How polite." Thaddeus always did prefer his mortals docile. She reached out and lifted a strand of Isolde's hair, examining it with distaste. "Tell me, little human, do you understand what you have done? Accepting a covenant bond?" "I am beginning to." "Are you?" Seraphine released her hair and stepped back. "Then you know that Thaddeus is bound to protect you. That he will sacrifice his standing, his power, even his existence to keep you safe." Her golden eyes glittered. "And you know that makes you a weapon, one his enemies will be very interested in acquiring." "I never asked for—" "It does not matter what you asked for." Seraphine's voice turned sharp. You are here. You are bound. And the court will judge whether your life is worth the chaos it brings. Before Isolde could respond, another knock sounded. This time, Thaddeus entered. His gaze swept from Seraphine to Isolde, and his expression hardened. Leave, Seraphine. I was merely introducing myself. Now. The single word carried such command that even Seraphine obeyed, though her departure was accompanied by a mocking smile thrown over her shoulder. The court convenes at sunset, Thaddeus. Do try not to be late. When she was gone, Thaddeus closed the door and turned to Isolde. Did she harm you? No, she merely... Isolde struggled for words, clarified my situation. Something that might have been guilt flickered across his face. Seraphine is complicated. She does not trust easily, and she sees threats where none exist. Is she your... Isolde stopped, horrified at herself. My what? Thaddeus asked quietly. Nothing. Forgive me. He moved closer, and Isolde found herself trapped between his gaze and the wall at her back. She was my lover. Once. Nearly 200 years ago. His voice was matter of fact. It ended badly, as most things do in immortal lives. I see. Do you? He searched her face, and Isolde had the disturbing sense that he could read every thought, every flutter of her pulse. I need you to understand something before we face the court. They will test you, question you. Some will try to frighten you, others to seduce you into betraying the covenant. His hand lifted, hovering near her cheek. You must be strong. I do not feel strong. You are. His fingers finally made contact, tracing the line of her jaw with impossible gentleness. You bore years of neglect and cruelty without breaking. You faced hunters without cowering. You took my hand when any sane mortal would have fled. His thumb brushed her lower lip, and Isolde's breath caught. You are stronger than you know, Isolde Ashford. Heat flooded through her. Dangerous, treacherous heat. She should step away, should remind herself that he was not human, that this was not real. But his touch was so gentle, and she had been starved for gentleness so long. What will the court do? She whispered. Judge whether the covenant stands, whether you are worthy of protection. His hand dropped away, and Isolde felt the loss like a physical ache. I will not let them harm you, but I need you to trust me. I barely know you. I know. His smile was sad. But trust is not always built on time. Sometimes it is built on necessity and choice. He offered his hand, just as he had in the ballroom, just as he had at midnight. Will you choose to trust me, Isolde? She looked at his outstretched palm, at the elegant fingers that had killed and protected in equal measure, at the impossible future he represented, and she placed her hand in his. Yes. Evening fell like a curtain. Thaddeus led Isolde through corridors of black stone, past chambers that held the ghosts of former grandeur, until they reached a hall that still retained its terrible majesty. Vaulted ceilings soared overhead, columns carved with strange symbols lined the walls, and at the far end, upon a dais, sat 13 thrones arranged in a semicircle. 12 were occupied. The vampires who regarded Isolde from those thrones were uniformly beautiful and uniformly terrifying. Some appeared young, others ancient. All of them radiated power that made her skin prickle. Thaddeus led her to the center of the hall and then, to her shock, took his place upon the 13th throne, the one in the middle, elevated slightly above the rest. A king, she remembered. I saw him crowned. The court of thorns is convened, Thaddeus said, his voice echoing through the chamber. We gather to judge the covenant bond formed between myself and Isolde Ashford, last daughter of Edmund Ashford, who swore blood oath 20 years past. A vampire with silver hair and ancient eyes leaned forward. The girl is mortal, fragile. She will die within a breath of our existence. Why bind yourself to such fleeting life? Because her father's oath was honorable, Thaddeus replied. And because I will not abandon those under my protection. Even if it costs you? Seraphine's voice rang out. Even if the order follows her here? Even if her presence divides this court? Thaddeus's gaze found Isolde across the hall, and in his eyes she saw something that stole the breath from her lungs. Even then, he said softly. The court erupted into argument, voices rising in anger and dissent. And Isolde understood, with terrifying clarity, that her life hung in the balance. Chapter 6. Blood and Testimony. The arguments raged for what felt like hours. Isolde stood alone in the center of the hall while vampires debated her worth as though she were an object rather than a person. Some called her a liability, others a curiosity. Seraphine's faction insisted that harboring a mortal under covenant would bring the Order's wrath down upon them all. Through it all, Thaddeus remained silent on his throne, his expression unreadable. Finally, the silver-haired vampire raised his hand. The hall fell silent. Enough. His voice carried absolute authority. Lord Corvain, you have claimed covenant protection for this mortal. By ancient law, you must prove she is worthy of such protection. His gaze shifted to Isolde. Girl? Step forward. Isolde's legs trembled, but she obeyed. She climbed the dais steps until she stood before the ancient vampire, acutely aware of Thaddeus's presence to her right. What is your name? Isolde Ashford. Do you understand what a covenant bond entails? She hesitated. I know it binds Lord Corvain to protect me. I know my father swore it 20 years ago. I know I renewed it when I accepted his hand willingly. And do you know the price of such protection? The vampire's eyes bored into hers. Lord Corvain cannot abandon you without breaking his honor. If you are captured, he must come for you, even unto death. If you are threatened, he must defend you, even against armies. If you suffer, he suffers. He paused. You have become his greatest weakness. Do you comprehend this? Horror washed through Isolde. She turned to Thaddeus. You never told me? It does not matter, Thaddeus said quietly. It does. Her voice broke. You have bound yourself to protect someone who will die in a handful of decades while you are eternal. It is just, he finished softly. It is just, Isolde. Your father earned that oath. You have done nothing to forfeit it, and I will not break faith. Lord Alaric makes a valid point, another vampire interjected, a woman with white blonde hair and cold blue eyes. The girl is a liability. Unless, her gaze sharpened. Unless Lord Corvain intends to turn her. The hall erupted again. Isolde's mind reeled. Turn me? She whispered. Thaddeus rose from his throne and the court fell silent. I have no intention of turning her without her consent. She will remain mortal unless she chooses otherwise. Then she chooses now, Seraphine said, her voice cutting. Let her decide. Mortality and freedom, or immortality and bondage to you. Let us see what she truly wants. All eyes turned to Isolde, her heart hammered against her ribs. She could not think, could not breathe. This is not, She cannot decide under duress, Thaddeus said, his voice hard. The court will not force this choice. The court will do what is necessary for survival, the silver-haired vampire countered. If the girl remains mortal, she is a vector for the Order to exploit. If she becomes one of us, she is bound by our laws and protection. He looked at Isolde. Choose, child, mortality or eternity. Stop. The single word from Thaddeus reverberated through the hall. He descended from the dais and moved to stand beside Isolde, his presence a shield. This court has no authority to demand she turn. That choice belongs to her alone, and she will make it if she is ready. You defy the court? Seraphine's voice was dangerous. I uphold the covenant. Thaddeus met her gaze without flinching. Which predates this court and supersedes its authority. Tension crackled through the air. Isolde felt poised on the edge of violence. Then the silver-haired vampire laughed, a sound like grinding stone. Very well, the covenant stands, for now. He leaned back in his throne. But there is one more test. If the girl is to remain under your protection, Thaddeus, she must prove she can survive in our world. What test? Thaddeus's voice had gone deadly quiet. Blood testimony. The vampire's smile was cruel. Let her offer her blood willingly. Let us see if she can endure our hunger without breaking. If she succeeds, the court will accept the covenant. If she fails, he shrugged. Then she was never worthy of protection to begin with. Horror paralyzed Isolde. You want me to... A single drop, the vampire clarified, given freely, witnessed by the court. If you can offer it without fear, without compulsion, then perhaps you are strong enough to stand among us. And if I refuse? Isolde whispered. Then the covenant is void, and Lord Corvain's protection becomes meaningless. Thaddeus turned to her, his expression anguished. You do not have to do this. But if I do not, the covenant breaks? Yes. Isolde looked around the hall at the assembled vampires, beautiful, terrible, ancient. She thought of the hunters, of Vivian's cruelty, of the life that awaited her if she fled. And she thought of Thaddeus, who had risked everything to honor an oath made to her father. I will do it. Isolde, I will do it, she repeated, stronger now. She met the silver-haired vampire's gaze. How? He gestured to a small silver knife on a pedestal beside his throne. A cut across your palm. Let 3 drops fall into the ceremonial cup. That is all. Isolde climbed the steps on shaking legs. The knife was cold in her hand, its edge impossibly sharp. She looked down at her palm, pale, unmarked. And then at Thaddeus. He had not moved. But she saw the tension in every line of his body, the restraint. He is terrified, she realized, not for himself, for me. The knowledge gave her courage. Isolde pressed the blade to her palm and drew it across in one swift motion. Pain flared, bright and hot. Blood welled up, crimson against her skin. She held her hand over the cup and let 3 drops fall. The effect was instantaneous. Every vampire in the hall went utterly still. Eyes darkened. Fangs gleamed. The air itself seemed to thicken with hunger. But no one moved. Isolde's hand shook as she pressed her other palm against the wound, trying to stem the bleeding. The scent of copper filled her nostrils. Thaddeus appeared beside her, moving faster than sight. He took her injured hand gently and wrapped it in a cloth from his coat, his touch exquisitely careful. Enough, he said, his voice rough. The test is complete. She has proven herself. The silver-haired vampire inclined his head. So she has. The court recognizes the covenant between Thaddeus Corvain and Isolde Ashford. Let it be witnessed and recorded. The tension broke. Vampires began to file from the hall, some casting curious glances at Isolde, others ignoring her entirely. Only Seraphine lingered, her golden eyes unreadable. Interesting, she murmured. Very interesting indeed. Then she too was gone. Isolde swayed. Thaddeus caught her, lifting her into his arms as though she weighed nothing. You should not have done that, he said quietly, carrying her from the hall. I had no choice. There is always a choice. Isolde looked up at him, at the harsh, beautiful planes of his face. Then I chose you. His steps faltered, their eyes met. And something shifted between them, something irrevocable and terrifying and impossibly sweet. Chapter 7. The Kiss in Shadow. Thaddeus carried Isolde back to the East Tower in silence. She felt the tension in his body, the barely leashed control. Her hand throbbed where she had cut it, and exhaustion pulled at her bones, but she remained acutely aware of his arms around her, his chest solid against her shoulder. He set her down carefully in her chamber and moved to light the candles. Cold blue flames sprang to life, casting shadows that danced across the stone walls. "Let me see your hand." Isolde extended it mutely. Thaddeus unwrapped the cloth with infinite care, examining the wound. It was shallow but still bleeding sluggishly. "This will hurt," he warned. Before she could ask what he meant, he poured something from a vial onto the cut. Liquid fire raced through her palm. Isolde gasped, but did not pull away. "What is that?" "A salve. It will speed healing and prevent infection." He wrapped her hand in fresh linen, his movements deft and practiced. "You were brave today." "Foolishly so." "You said I was strong." Strength and foolishness often walk hand in hand. But his voice held something that might have been admiration. He released her hand and stepped back, putting distance between them. "The court will not trouble you further. You have proven yourself." "At what cost?" Isolde asked quietly. "They wanted me to become like you, to turn. Is that what it will take for me to be truly safe?" Thaddeus was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "Turning is not a gift, Isolde. It is a curse. An eternity of hunger, of watching everyone you love wither and die, of becoming something that exists outside of life itself." His eyes met hers. "I would not wish it on anyone, especially not you." "Why especially not me?" "Because you still have humanity, kindness, the capacity for joy." His expression softened. "You deserve to keep those things, to live a mortal life full of sunlight and warmth, and all the small beauties that immortals can never truly appreciate." "And what if I do not want a mortal life?" The words escaped before Isolde could stop them. "What if I am tired of being weak and helpless? What if I want to be strong enough to stand beside you rather than behind you?" Thaddeus stared at her, and for the first time she saw genuine shock in his eyes. "You cannot mean that." "I do not know what I mean," Isolde admitted. "I only know that I am tired of being afraid, tired of being something to be protected and pitied." She lifted her chin. "You said I was brave. Then let me choose bravery." "Turning you would not be bravery, it would be damnation." "Then why does Seraphine seem so powerful? Why do the others command respect rather than pity?" "Because they have lost their humanity." Thaddeus's control finally cracked. "Because they have become the very thing mortals should fear. I have spent 5 centuries trying to hold on to what I was before the change. Do you think I would willingly subject you to that struggle?" "No," Isolde said quietly. "I think you would spare me any pain, even if it cost you everything." He turned away, his hands clenched. "You do not understand what you are asking." "Then help me understand." She moved closer, drawn by something she could not name. "Tell me what it means. What you have lost. What you have gained." For a long moment she thought he would refuse. Then he began to speak, his voice low and raw. "I was mortal once. A lord with lands and a family. I had a wife who loved me. 2 children who called me father." His shoulders tensed. "The change came during a raid. A vampire attack. I was turned trying to protect them. And when I woke 3 days later in my tomb, they were already dead. Killed by the same creatures who made me into this." Isolde's heart clenched. "Thaddeus. I have lived 500 years since that night. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have accumulated power and knowledge beyond mortal comprehension, and I would trade it all. Every century, every victory, for one more day as a human. One more hour holding my daughter, one more moment of warmth. He turned back to her, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears that would never fall. So no, Isolde, I will not turn you. I will not condemn you to this existence. I will protect you until your mortal span ends, and then I will mourn you as I have mourned everyone I have ever loved. But I will not make you into a monster. The pain in his voice shattered something inside Isolde. She crossed the remaining distance between them and did something utterly reckless. She reached up and touched his face. Thaddeus froze. His skin was cold beneath her fingertips, but not unpleasantly so. She traced the sharp line of his jaw, the elegant arch of his cheekbone. "You are not a monster," she whispered. "Isolde, you are not." She stepped closer, until mere inches separated them. "Monsters do not grieve. They do not remember the names of their children. They do not spend centuries trying to hold on to humanity." His control was breaking. She could see it in the way his hands trembled, the way his breath, unnecessary but habitual, came faster. "You do not know what you do to me," he said hoarsely. "Then show me." For one heartbeat, neither moved. Then Thaddeus made a sound that was half growl, half surrender, and closed the distance between them. His mouth found hers with devastating gentleness. The kiss was cold fire and sweet darkness. His lips were soft despite their chill, and he kissed her with a restraint that spoke of centuries of control. One hand cupped her face, the other remained rigidly at his side, as though he did not trust himself to touch her further. Isolde's eyes closed. Her injured hand came up to rest against his chest, and she felt no heartbeat, only stillness and impossible strength. The kiss deepened fractionally. Thaddeus's thumb traced her cheekbone, his touch worshipful and aching. Then he pulled away, stepping back with visible effort. "I should not have done that." Isolde touched her lips, still tingling from the cold. "I am glad you did." "Isolde, I am not sorry," she said firmly, "and I am not afraid." He stared at her, and in his eyes she saw wonder and terror, and something that looked dangerously like hope. "You should be," he whispered, "because I am." Before she could respond, he was gone, vanished into shadow as though he had never been. Isolde sank onto the bed, her heart racing and her hand throbbing and her lips still cold from his kiss. And she knew with absolute certainty that there was no returning to the life she had left behind. She was bound to Thaddeus Corvain now, not just by covenant, but by choice. Chapter 8. The Order's Vengeance. 3 days passed in strange suspended peace. Isolde saw Thaddeus only in glimpses, a shadow in the corridor, a figure at the tower window at dawn. He did not come to her chamber again, and she understood why. The kiss had shaken them both, opened a door that could not easily be closed. Instead, Alaric became her guide. The silver-haired vampire was less frightening than Seraphine, and more talkative than Thaddeus. He showed her the castle's library, its conservatory where blood-red roses bloomed despite the winter cold, its halls lined with portraits of vampires long since destroyed. "Thaddeus avoids you," Alaric observed one afternoon as they walked through the portrait gallery. "I am aware. He fears what he feels, what you make him feel." Alaric glanced at her, his ancient eyes assessing. "You have awoken something in him that has been dormant for centuries. Hope is a dangerous thing for immortals." "Why?" "Because hope requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is weakness." He stopped before a portrait of a woman with dark hair and sad eyes. That was Thaddeus's wife, Ilara. She died 500 years ago, but he has never forgotten her. Never forgiven himself for failing to protect her. Isolde stared at the portrait. Ilara had been beautiful, but there was something in her painted gaze that spoke of sorrow. He loved her very much. He did, and her death nearly destroyed him. He spent a century in bloodlust and grief before finally clawing his way back to sanity. Alaric's expression softened. You remind him that love is possible, and that terrifies him, because love means loss. Always. Before Isolde could respond, a sound shattered the quiet, a bell tolling from the castle's highest tower. Once, twice, 3 times. Alaric's expression went hard. Inside. Now. What? The alarm bell. We are under attack. He grabbed her arm and pulled her into a side chamber. Stay here. Do not leave for any reason. He vanished before she could protest, moving with inhuman speed. Isolde pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering. Through the narrow window she could see movement in the courtyard below, vampires gathering, weapons being drawn. And then she saw them. The Order. Captain Aldrich led at least 50 men, all armed with blessed silver and crossbows. They poured through the castle gates like a dark tide, and the battle erupted with savage fury. Isolde watched in horror as silver clashed against supernatural speed. Vampires fell, their bodies disintegrating into ash. But the Order's men fell too, throats torn, blood staining the snow. Where was Thaddeus? She scanned the chaos and finally spotted him. A figure in black, moving through the battle with lethal precision. He wielded no weapon, only his bare hands and terrible speed. 3 men fell before him, then 5, then 10. But there were too many. Isolde saw Aldrich raise a crossbow, saw the silver bolt aim directly at Thaddeus's heart. She did not think, did not hesitate. She screamed his name. Thaddeus turned, saw the bolt, and moved. But not quickly enough. The silver caught him in the shoulder, and he staggered. His eyes found Isolde in the window, and his expression was fury and terror combined. Then Seraphine was there, pulling him back as more vampires surged forward to cover his retreat. The battle raged for what felt like hours but was likely only minutes. Finally, the Order retreated, dragging their wounded and leaving their dead behind. The vampires did not pursue. Isolde stood frozen at the window, shaking uncontrollably. The door burst open. Thaddeus stood there, bloodied and enraged. The silver bolt still protruded from his shoulder. What were you thinking? His voice was raw. You could have been seen, targeted, killed. You were going to be shot. I would have healed. He crossed the room in 3 strides, gripping her shoulders. I am immortal, Isolde. A bolt to the heart would incapacitate me, but I would survive. But if they had seen you, if they had realized you were here, I could not just watch you die. I am already dead. The words were a roar, then softer, broken. I am already dead. He released her and sank to his knees, his strength finally failing. Isolde dropped beside him, her hands hovering over the bolt. Let me help. You cannot. Let me help, she repeated, stronger now. Please. Their eyes met. Finally, Thaddeus nodded. Isolde gripped the bolt and pulled. It came free with a sickening sound, and dark blood welled from the wound. Thaddeus hissed, but did not cry out. It will heal, he said, pressing a hand to the injury. Silver slows the process, but it will heal. You are bleeding. I have bled for 5 centuries. His voice was tired. So tired. This is nothing. Isolde did something she had been warned never to do. She brought her wrist, the one without the bandage, to her lips and bit down, hard enough to break skin. What are you? She pressed her bleeding wrist to his mouth. Thaddeus jerked back as though burned. No. You need blood to heal. Take mine. I will not. You said you were bound to protect me, that the covenant makes you responsible for my safety. Isolde met his gaze, her voice steady despite her fear. Then let me help you. Let me do this one thing. Isolde, if I taste your blood, I will not want to stop. Then I will trust you to stop anyway. The struggle was visible on his face. hunger warring with honor. Finally, with a sound that might have been a sob, he took her wrist and brought it to his lips. The sensation was nothing like she had imagined. There was no pain, only a strange warmth that spread through her veins. Thaddeus drank carefully, his eyes closed, and she felt the connection between them deepen. Something primal and binding and utterly irreversible. After only seconds, he pulled away, releasing her wrist. The bite marks were already closing. "Enough," he said hoarsely, "more than enough." His shoulder wound was knitting itself closed, flesh mending with impossible speed. They knelt together in the silence, blood and trust and something deeper passing between them. "Thank you," Thaddeus whispered. Isolde took his hand, the same gesture that had begun this entire impossible journey. "You are not alone," she said quietly. "Not anymore." His fingers tightened around hers, and outside the snow began to fall, covering the blood-stained courtyard in a blanket of white. Chapter 9. The Binding Covenant. The castle fell into uneasy quiet after the attack. 5 vampires had been destroyed, twice that many hunters lay dead in the snow. The court convened that evening, and Isolde was summoned to stand before them once more. She went willingly, Thaddeus at her side. The silver-haired vampire, Lord Alaric, she had learned his name properly, regarded her with something that might have been respect. "You saved Lord Corvain's life today. I warned him, nothing more. You also offered your blood to speed his healing." Seraphine's voice was sharp. "A bond sealed in blood is not easily broken. You have made yourself essential to him." "I made myself his ally," Isolde corrected quietly. "There is a difference." "Is there?" Seraphine's golden eyes glittered. "Tell me, mortal, do you love him?" The hall fell silent. Isolde's heart stuttered. She had not allowed herself to name the feeling that had grown between them, had not dared to examine it too closely. "That is not your concern," Thaddeus said, his voice cold. "It is the court's concern if your judgment is compromised." Seraphine rose from her throne. "You kissed her, drank from her, bound yourself to her in ways that go far beyond covenant law. If you are compromised, you are vulnerable. And if you are vulnerable, we all are. My judgment is sound." "Prove it." Seraphine descended from the dais, moving toward Isolde with predatory grace. "Send her away. Return her to the mortal world, find her a safe haven, and release the covenant. If you can do that, I will believe your feelings do not cloud your reason." Thaddeus said nothing. Isolde's chest tightened. She understood what Seraphine was doing, forcing Thaddeus to choose between his duty to the court and his attachment to her. "I will go," Isolde heard herself say, "if it will bring peace to the court, if it will end this conflict. I will leave." "No." The single word from Thaddeus was absolute. He turned to the assembled vampires, his expression carved from stone. "I will not release the covenant. I will not send her away. She has proven her worth, her courage, and her loyalty. Any who challenge her challenges me." "Thaddeus," Alaric began, "this court exists because I held it together through the purges. Because I spent centuries building alliances and protecting those who had nowhere else to turn." Thaddeus's voice rang through the hall. "I have given everything to preserve our kind, and I will not apologize for choosing to honor an oath that predates all of you." "Even if it costs you your throne?" Seraphine asked softly. "There is no throne without honor, and there is no honor without sacrifice." He looked at each vampire in turn. "If the court demands I choose between covenant and crown, I choose covenant." Shock rippled through the hall. "You would abdicate?" Alaric's voice held disbelief. "I would uphold my vows." Thaddeus's gaze found Isolde. "Some things matter more than power." The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. Finally, Alaric laughed, a sound like ancient bells. You have not changed, old friend. Still bound by that damnable mortal sense of honor. He stood. Very well. The court acknowledges the covenant. Let no one question it again. One by one the other vampires rose and inclined their heads. Even Seraphine, though her expression remained cold. The court is dismissed, Alaric declared. The vampires filed out, leaving Isolde and Thaddeus alone in the vast hall. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Isolde found her voice. You would have given up your position. For me? Yes. Why? Thaddeus turned to her, and the vulnerability in his eyes stole her breath. Because 500 years ago I failed to protect those I loved. I was too weak, too slow, too bound by mortal limitations. He moved closer. When I was turned, I swore I would never fail again. That I would become strong enough to protect anyone who placed their trust in me. His hand lifted, cupping her face. You placed your trust in me, Isolde. You chose to stay when any sane person would have fled. And I cannot, betray that trust. Even if it costs you everything? Especially then? Isolde felt tears prick her eyes. I do not deserve such devotion. You deserve far more than I can give you. His thumb traced the curve of her cheek. You deserve sunlight and warmth, and a life without fear. You deserve to grow old surrounded by children and grandchildren. You deserve every small joy that mortality offers. And what if I want something else? Her voice was barely a whisper. What if I want this? Want you? Thaddeus closed his eyes, pain etched into every line of his face. Do not ask me for that. Why? Because I am not strong enough to refuse you. The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Isolde rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. Gently, a question rather than a demand. For a heartbeat, Thaddeus remained frozen. Then, with a sound that was half surrender, half desperation, he kissed her back. This kiss was different from the first. Deeper, more urgent. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and she felt the terrible restraint in his body, the hunger held barely in check. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless despite only one of them needing air. I cannot turn you, Thaddeus said hoarsely. I cannot condemn you to this existence. Then do not. Isolde rested her forehead against his chest. Let me stay as I am. Let me live my mortal span beside you. And when my time comes, she paused. When my time comes, let me go knowing I chose this. Chose you. You will age, I will not. I know. You will die. I will endure. I know. She looked up at him. But I would rather have 30 years of this, of us, than a lifetime of safety without you. Thaddeus stared at her as though seeing her for the first time. Then, slowly, he smiled. A true smile, warm and devastating. You are extraordinary, Isolde Ashford. No, she whispered. I am simply choosing not to be afraid. He kissed her again, soft and reverent, and for the first time in 500 years, Thaddeus Corvain allowed himself to hope. Chapter 10. The Blood Moon. Rising. Winter deepened into a cold that felt almost sentient. Isolde settled into life at the castle with surprising ease, the vampires having accepted her presence, largely left her alone, though she occasionally caught Seraphine watching her with unreadable eyes. Alaric became something like a friend, teaching her the castle's history and the complicated politics of their kind. And Thaddeus was constant. He spent his evenings with her in the library, reading by candlelight. He walked with her through the snow-covered gardens, pointing out winter constellations. He taught her to dance the old way, with courtly steps and formal grace, and she laughed when she stumbled over her own feet. They did not kiss again, not after that night in the hall. But the connection between them deepened nonetheless, built on conversations that lasted until dawn, on silences that needed no words, on small touches that spoke of trust and growing affection. Isolde understood now what Alaric had meant. Hope was dangerous for immortals, because hope meant caring, and caring meant vulnerability. She saw it in the way Thaddeus watched her, as though memorizing every expression, in the way he positioned himself between her and any potential threat, in the way he said her name, soft, careful, like a prayer. And she felt her own heart opening in response, despite every logical reason not to. On the night of the blood moon, everything changed. The moon rose huge and red over the mountains, casting crimson light across the snow. Isolde stood at her window, watching it climb, when Thaddeus appeared at her door. "Come with me," he said. "There is something you need to see." He led her through the castle and up a winding stair to the highest tower, the one from which the alarm bell hung. From here, the entire valley spread below them, bathed in eerie red light. "What is this place?" Isolde asked. "The watchtower. From here, we can see for miles in every direction." Thaddeus moved to stand beside her at the parapet. "I used to come here after Alara died, to watch the sun rise and remember what it felt like to be warm." Isolde's heart clenched. "Do you still come here?" "Not for 200 years." He glanced at her. "Until tonight." "Why tonight?" "Because blood moons are significant for our kind. They mark transitions, endings and beginnings." His voice softened. "And I wanted to share it with you." They stood in silence, watching the moon's slow arc across the sky. Finally, Thaddeus spoke again. "I have been thinking about what you said. About living your mortal span beside me." Isolde's breath caught. And I realize I have been selfish, keeping you here, isolated from your own kind, bound to a world of darkness." He turned to face her fully. "I want to give you a choice, a true choice." "What do you mean?" "Alaric has contacts among mortals, scholars, artists, people who know of our kind but do not hunt us. He can arrange for you to live among them, safely, comfortably. You could have a life, Isolde, a real life. Marriage, children, all the things you deserve." Pain lanced through her chest. "You want me to leave. I want you to be happy." "I am happy here. You are content. There is a difference." His expression was carefully controlled, but she saw the anguish beneath. "I have watched you these past weeks. You smile, you laugh. But there is a loneliness in you. A longing for sunlight and normalcy. I cannot give you those things. I do not want them. Not if it means leaving you. Isolde, no." She grabbed his hands, forcing him to meet her gaze. "You asked me to choose. I have chosen. I choose this place, this life, you." Her voice broke. "Do not send me away because you think it is noble. Let me stay because I want to. What if I cannot bear to watch you age?" The question was torn from him. "What if I cannot endure watching you grow old and die while I remain unchanged?" "Then we will endure it together." Isolde lifted his hand to her cheek. "You said you have lived 500 years, that you would trade it all for one more day as a human. But I would trade every day of sunlight for one more night with you." Thaddeus stared at her, and she saw the moment his control shattered. He pulled her into his arms, holding her with a desperation that spoke of centuries of loneliness finally breaking. "I do not deserve you," he whispered against her hair. "Then we are even. Because I do not deserve your protection, your patience, your kindness." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "But I want them anyway. I want all of you, Thaddeus. For however long I have. It will hurt. When you die? Yes. But would you rather have this love, however brief, or another 500 years of isolation? He did not answer with words. Instead, he kissed her, deep and claiming and infinitely gentle. The blood moon painted them in crimson light, and Isolde felt the bond between them solidify into something unbreakable. When they finally broke apart, Thaddeus rested his forehead against hers. "If you stay, I will give you everything I have, every moment, every century of knowledge, every protection I can offer." His voice was rough with emotion. "I will love you until your mortal span ends, and then I will mourn you until time itself stops. And I will love you for every day I breathe." Isolde smiled through tears. "That is enough. More than enough." Below them, the castle bells began to toll, not in alarm this time, but in celebration. The blood moon had reached its apex. "What are they celebrating?" Isolde asked. "A covenant acknowledged, a bond sealed under the blood moon." Thaddeus's expression softened. "The court is witnessing our choice. They approve? They understand." He kissed her again, soft and reverent. Love between mortal and immortal is rare. When it occurs, it is sacred. Isolde leaned into his embrace, feeling safer than she had since her father died. The future was uncertain. Her life would be brief compared to his eternity. But in this moment, under the blood moon's light, they had each other. And that was everything. Chapter 11. Eternal, in memory. 40 years passed like a dream. Isolde grew older with grace, her dark hair turning silver, her face gaining lines that spoke of laughter and love. Thaddeus remained unchanged, eternally young, eternally constant. And if his eyes held sadness as he watched her age, he never spoke of it. They filled their years with small joys. Isolde learned to read the ancient texts in the library, becoming a scholar of vampire history. She tended the blood rose garden, coaxing new blooms even in winter. She sat beside Thaddeus in the court, offering counsel that the vampires came to respect. And every night, he held her as though she were infinitely precious. "Do you regret it?" Isolde asked one evening as they sat before the fire in her chamber. She was 70 now, her body frail, but her mind still sharp. "Letting me stay?" Thaddeus looked down at her, his arms gentle around her shoulders. "Not for a single moment. Even knowing how this ends? Especially knowing." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "These 40 years have been the happiest of my entire existence. I would not trade them for anything." Isolde smiled, leaning into his embrace. "Good. Because I have no regrets either." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance. Finally, Isolde spoke again. "Will you tell me about Alara, your wife?" Thaddeus stiffened slightly. "Why?" "Because I want to understand all of you, even the parts that hurt." He was quiet for so long she thought he would refuse. Then he began to speak, his voice soft with memory. "Alara was kind, patient. She loved music and gardening and our children with a fierceness that took my breath away." A sad smile touched his lips. "She would have liked you. You have her strength, her gentle stubbornness. I am honored by the comparison. She would have told me to choose you, to let myself love again." Thaddeus's arms tightened fractionally. "She always said that love was not diminished by being shared, that my heart was large enough for many loves. She was wise. She was extraordinary." He paused. "As are you." Isolde felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from gratitude. "Thank you for telling me. Thank you for asking." They fell silent again. And Isolde felt sleep tugging at her consciousness. It came easier now, in these late years. Her body craved rest more and more. "Thaddeus?" "Yes, beloved? When I am gone, do not let the grief destroy you. Promise me." His breath caught, a habit maintained despite no need for air. "Isolde, promise me she insisted, turning to look up at him. You have so much life left to live, so much good you can still do. Do not waste it in mourning. How can I not mourn you? His voice was raw. You are my second chance, my proof that love can survive even death and darkness. Then honor that love by living. Isolde cupped his face, her aged hand trembling slightly. Find joy again. Help others. Protect the innocent. Be the man I fell in love with. Honorable, kind, impossibly good. You ask the impossible. I ask what I know you are capable of. She smiled. You are Thaddeus Corvain, the vampire king who chose covenant over crown, the immortal who remembered how to hope. You will endure this. I know you will. He pulled her close, burying his face in her silver hair. I love you, Isolde Ashford, with everything I am, with everything I will ever be. And I love you, she whispered. Always. The end came gently, 3 months later. Isolde woke one morning feeling the weight of her years settle over her like a cloak. She knew, with the clarity that comes at the end, that her time had come. She asked Alaric to summon the court. They gathered in her chamber, all of them, even Seraphine, and she spoke her farewells with quiet dignity. To Alaric, thank you for your friendship, for teaching me that immortals can still laugh. To Seraphine, you loved him long before I did. I am sorry I could not give him back to you. Seraphine's golden eyes were soft for the first time. He was never mine to claim, only yours. To the others, protect him. When I am gone, protect him from his grief. He will try to withdraw. Do not let him. They promised. Finally, Isolde was alone with Thaddeus. He sat beside her on the bed, holding her hand with exquisite gentleness. He had not wept, could not weep, but the devastation in his eyes was worse than tears. Stay with me, he whispered, just a little longer. I am here. Isolde squeezed his hand weakly. I am right here. I do not know how to exist without you. You did it for 500 years before me. You will do it again. She smiled, though it took effort. And perhaps someday, you will find another soul who needs protecting, another lonely heart. You will love again, Thaddeus. Not the same, never the same, but just as true. Impossible. Not impossible, just later. Her breathing was growing shallow. Will you do something for me? Anything. Tell me what you see, when you look at me now. Thaddeus studied her face, the lines, the silver hair, the tired eyes. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. I see the girl who sat beside me in a ballroom and did not run. I see the woman who offered her blood to save me. I see courage and kindness and a love that made 500 years of loneliness worthwhile. His thumb traced her cheek. I see the greatest gift I have ever been given. And I see beauty that time could never diminish. Isolde smiled. Then I have lived well. You have lived extraordinarily. Her eyes drifted closed. Stay with me? Always. Isolde Ashford died as gently as she had lived, in the arms of the vampire king who had loved her across the impossible divide between mortal and immortal. And Thaddeus Corvain, who had endured 500 years of darkness, held her until dawn broke over the mountains. Years later, travelers in the North Country spoke of a castle inhabited by the undying. They told stories of a vampire king who was just but distant, who protected the surrounding lands but never took a consort. And they spoke of the garden where blood-red roses bloomed eternal, tended by the king himself every evening as he spoke softly to the stone monument at its center. The inscription was simple: Isolde Ashford beloved, brave, brief as starlight, eternal in memory. And if sometimes the king was seen standing in that garden, his hand outstretched as though touching someone only he could see, the travelers knew better than to disturb him. Some loves transcend death. Some bonds endure beyond mortality. And some promises, stay, echo through eternity.